What you're about to see is an extremely rare injury, as not only one, but both biceps tendons rupture. Welcome back, everybody. I'm Dr. Brian Sutterer, and this is your #1 source for learning about the unique medical side of the world of sports. There's a lot of stuff that we can learn from this video shared by Instagram user Illuminati Iron, demonstrating not only one, but both biceps tendons being ruptured. Tendons connect muscles to bones, and any of the tendons in our body can rupture whenever they're subjected to excessive stretch and load. When you're doing a preacher curl, the act of lowering the bar down is an eccentric load on the muscle. Eccentric meaning that the muscle is lengthening while it's trying to contract. So he's lowering this load really slowly, and you can see how much the biceps on both arms are trying to contract. But as it's contracting, that muscle is being lengthened, that tendon is being stretched. And this is when tendons are most vulnerable to getting injured, is this excessive eccentric load. As he gets near to full extension here, you can first see that left distal biceps tendon rupture with that retraction of the biceps approximately higher up in the arm, followed quickly by the right side rupturing as well. Afterwards here, you can see what we would call a reverse Popeye deformity. So whenever the biceps tendon ruptures up by the shoulder, it kind of retracts down lower to the elbow. We call that a Popeye deformity. So here, when it's the lower portion of the biceps tendon tearing and retracting upwards, we call that a reverse Popeye deformity. These tendons are big, thick bands of tissue, and so when they tear, they're understandably going to give you that classic pop, and you can actually hear when it happens on this lift. That audible snap is the moment that the tendon ruptures from its attachment onto the bone. Next, we're going to dive into the anatomy of the biceps tendon and some more details about this type of injury. But first, I want to give a quick shout out to the sponsor of this video. This segment of the video is sponsored by Wealthfront. It doesn't matter if you have a few hundred or a few $1,000s. Smart money management is crucial to ensuring your financial security. For me, part of this means making the most out of my money by keeping my short-term savings in a high-yield account. If you have savings sitting in your checking account, you're losing out because with interest rates going up, you could be earning more by simply moving your money to a high yield account. Wealthfront is the app for making the most of your savings in any market condition, and their cash account offers a high yield APY that's 20 times the national average. Basically, this means if your money is sitting around making minimal interest in a standard savings account, you could earn more interest by moving to Wealthfront. Wealthfront just increased the APY in their cash account to 2%, one of the highest in the game. They set me up with this demo account to show you the app, and it's just really convenient to see all your account balances in one place. You can set goals for yourself through the app, and you can even make easy transfers and do things like deposit checks. Start your account today by heading over to wealthfront.com/BrianMD and make a smart move with your savings. Wealthfront also has 0 account fees and unlimited free transfers between their accounts and other external investment and banking accounts. Plus, if you ever want to invest with Wealthfront, you can move your money into their award-winning investment account with no stress. So make a smart choice with your finances and check out Wealthfront and their high-yield cash account by clicking on the link in the description below. Now let's get back to our learning. With our biodigital anatomy tool here, we are now looking at the biceps brachii. Bi meaning two, and so there are of course 2 heads of the biceps muscle. The long head is the one that kind of sits more on the outside of the muscle and has this really long tendon that actually goes up and inserts up at the socket of the shoulder joint, right here where the labrum is. If you heard about a slap tear that athletes can get, it's a tear kind of in this portion of the labrum where the biceps tendon is actually anchored onto that socket of the shoulder. The other is the short head, and the short head has its origin on the coracoid process. If you kind of feel in the front of your shoulder, you'll feel this hard kind of bump. That's your coracoid process where the short head of the biceps originates. Both of these are then going to come down together, and ultimately the biceps is going to insert down on the radius. So now this is the insertion of the biceps on the bone called the radius. This part of the biceps tendon is what's responsible for a lot of the pronation and supination of our elbow. So when your arms are tucked at your side, whenever you are palms down and you turn your palms up, that's supination. And a lot of that activation comes actually from your biceps. So you can feel as your palm goes up and down how much your biceps contracts. Nearby in this area, we have the tendon of the other elbow flexor, the brachialis. The brachialis is actually the one that provides a lot of the elbow flexion strength, and it sits kind of deep behind the biceps. When we get into more detail here with this distal biceps tendon, those long and short heads actually have different insertion points in terms of how far down the radius they insert. So they actually kind of maintain 2 separate tendons going down into that footprint of the distal biceps. You keep hearing me say distal biceps. So with anatomical descriptions, anything closer to the body is considered proximal. So when we're talking about the biceps, the tendon up by the shoulder is the proximal biceps tendon. The tendon down by the hand is the distal. It's much more common to have tears of the biceps tendon up here as opposed to these distal ones. Something like 3 to 10% only are these lower biceps ones. So going back to the lift here, you just imagine that biceps tendon being stretched at the bottom when that elbow is all the way out in full extension. The tendon can't maintain that load and basically just ruptures. Now, understandably, a lot of you are going to watch this and be absolutely terrified to go out and do preacher curls again, and I frankly wouldn't blame you. But it's important to understand the different risk reward involved in each type of exercise and understand the sort of underlying risk factors for why you may develop an injury like this. The preacher curl isolates the biceps in a way that other exercises don't, based on how it supports the back of the elbow. Essentially, there's no way you can cheat out of that position at the end of the curl that's hardest to overcome the weight and curl back up. But because it isolates the biceps so much, it puts an insane amount of load on the biceps on the tendon, making it naturally a riskier exercise. All of our muscles have this length-force relationship, where depending on the length of the muscle, it's able to generate more force. And that's actually at sort of this midpoint. So it's a lot easier to hold a lot of weight in elbow flexion when we're somewhat flexed, rather than when we're all the way out straight. It's much, much harder to control weight from this position than the amount of force we can generate in our muscle when it's a little bit flexed. When you're doing a preacher curl and you get down to that terminal position, you aren't basically able to cheat in any way to help overcome that length disadvantage that the muscle has because of how it's been stretched. So you then subject your biceps, the tendon, to all of that load trying to curl it back up. And it's deceiving because when you start at the top, you feel really strong because you're in that advantageous position. But then as you lower it down, you get to that far end of that force length curve, and it's really hard to come back up without overloading the tissue. You have to also understand that tendons take longer to adapt to increasing workload compared to the muscle. So your muscle might get stronger, the neuromuscular control might get quicker to where you are able to lift more, but the tendon hasn't had time to fully adapt to that load that you're putting it under. So if you advance load too quickly, you run risk of injuring those structures. Also, the fact that he had been progressing through all these different loads, by the time you get to that final point where you reach that tensile strength of the tendon, you've almost exhausted it. You've fatigued that tendon. You've weakened it to a point where now you subject it to that ultimate load, which it simply cannot maintain. All of these tissues in our body have just innate biomechanical structural properties that if you were to just take a machine and pull from end to end, eventually you're going to hit a point where it fails. No matter how prepped you are, how strong you are going into it, every structure has an ultimate failure point. I don't know if I've ever heard of anybody tearing both biceps tendons at the same time. Essentially, what I think we're seeing here is, initially it's that left tendon that goes, and as soon as that left biceps tendon has snapped, you're not doing anything to help support that bar with that left arm. And so now all that weight is being instantly transferred over to the right side, and we're already in a compromising position. So now the right side goes as well. If he would have had just another split second to drop the bar after noticing the left side go, he probably would have been okay. But it's that transfer of all that load immediately over to an already compromised tendon that causes the right one to go out as well. This is one of the few orthopedic sports medicine injuries that is extremely urgent to be seen and repair. Pec tendon ruptures are another one that you really have to be seen as quickly as possible, because the longer you wait, the more that tendon can scar down and make it a real challenge for the surgeon to fix. Surprisingly, something like an ACL tear that we think about as being equally devastating, oftentimes we might wait a few weeks before doing the surgery. But a distal biceps tendon rupture like we see here is something that you want to repair as soon as possible before it retracts too high up and develops a lot of scarring. Let me know as always any questions or comments down below, and until next time, we'll see you later. Bye.